All right, we are live. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Shel. Good morning. This is early in the morning for us in California. I'm happy to be with you today to talk to you about how to get ready for submitting an EMBA application. Many of you this time of year, which is the holidays, have waited to start preparing your applications to when you have a break from work. Very understandable. But as you start to look at the calendars, many times you start to get a little nervous about, wow, can I make it in time? So we thought we'd give a webinar this morning to talk to you about how to think about preparing, assuming that your deadline might be about 2 months away. For those of you with a deadline closer, you can just apply many of these same steps, just in a very much more condensed time frame. So let's just start talking about steps to make sure you're taking to get prepared within 2 months to submit a great application. Before heading into this discussion, I should just talk to you briefly about our company. I'm the president and founder of MBAadmit.com. We've been providing advising for over 33 decades, and we have plenty of experience with MBA admissions advising. Our company predates all of the top eMBA programs, which means that we've seen them all from year one. We understand their nuances, their preferences, and so therefore we're able to direct and guide our clients quite well. Some of the schools that we've had great success with, it's been all the top schools. So we know, again, we know them quite well at the EMBA level. We do have quite a number of EMBA applicants every year. And so if you're interested in schools like this and you want assistance, feel free to reach out to us. And again, we're more than happy to give you a free profile evaluation if you are interested to know what we think about the strength of your candidacy for an EMBA program. So feel free to reach out to us. You can send your resume to us directly at the address here. You can also fill out a profile evaluation form, which is on our homepage. All right. So the goal, if you're thinking about submitting an application soon, just remember that your goal is not just to get an application in. You're trying to compose an outstanding, compelling application that gets you to a yes. Among the most compelling or important components will be your essays, your recommendations, and the resume. So those are really important parts that really need to be refined and honed and presented to the highest standard possible. So what should you be doing in the time left before the deadline? First of all, revise your resume. The reason that we say to do this first is that in the ideal world, you will revise it to make it an outstanding application resume, which is somewhat different than a job resume. And then you will send it in to the schools to get their feedback about your candidacy. Now, hopefully, getting their feedback about your candidacy is just a formality because you're a strong candidate. But you want to do that just to get on their radar screen. In many cases, they're going to try to stay in touch with you, and so it's your opportunity to have some contact with the school and with potentially someone on the admissions committee. Now, you don't want to start to do that process if you do not have an outstanding resume. So you want to make sure your resume is appropriate for an admissions application. And so again, the application resume is somewhat different than a job resume. There are usually additional categories on there that you would not have on a job resume. So you want to make sure you understand what should be there, make sure all of the information is business relevant, and present your credentials in the best possible light. So once you have that done, once it's revised, you would want to send it into the schools so that you're on their radar screen. They know that you're mobilizing an application, and they might give you additional feedback as well. The next thing to think about is, does your school, your target school, require a standardized test? Now, I focused here on the executive assessment. There's also the GMAT and the GRE. The reason that I go straight to executive assessment is that that is much easier to prepare for than the GRE and the GMAT. And so the vast majority of people that we work with for the EMBA take the executive assessment. There's really no reason that you would want to put yourself through the pain of preparing for the GMAT. It takes a whole lot more work to do that. And so if your school is requiring a standardized test, usually the executive assessment is the best route because it's easier to prepare for. Now, the other thing to mention though is that not all schools require the executive assessment. So that's the first thing you should find out is for the schools that you're interested in, do they even require it? And so some of the top schools that don't require a standardized test would be MIT, USC, NYU, Cornell, Kellogg. Those schools do not require an executive assessment. So for people who are applying to EMBA programs, some people will target those schools simply because they don't want to have to study for a standardized test. Now, if you do, or if you're interested in a school that requires a standardized test, like Booth and Columbia and Wharton, then you need to study to make sure that you're going to get a good score. And so the steps to take are, first of all, begin studying. Most people will go to GMAT, which is the maker of the executive assessment. They're also the maker of the GMAT test, but they provide some preparation materials. Most people will purchase those and start to practice. Track how well you're doing by taking a mock exam that is provided in those materials, and you'll see your score. Remember that oftentimes those mock scores come in higher than you're going to get in person when you actually take the real test. And so if you get a 155, you may come in at 152 on the real test. And if you get a 150, you may get a 147 on the real test. And so they tend to be a little bit higher. So use that number to sort of gauge where you are. And if, for instance, you come in at a 150 on the mock exam, you may not be ready to get a score over 150 on the real exam. So just keep that in mind. There are 4 tests in the current package that they provide. And so you have an opportunity to take one, see how you're doing, and then wait a bit, take another one a little bit later and see where you are. Once you do take the real test, just remember that there are a limited number of tries. So unlike the GMAT, which caps it at a certain number per year, the executive assessment caps it over a lifetime. In the past, it used to be 2 times total that you had as opportunities to take it. And that meant, so after the second, there were no more tries. Today, because of the pandemic, they are allowing you to take it online, which means at home. And so there are a few more attempts, but it keeps changing. So you're going to need to check with the GMAC website to see how many attempts you're able to take. And so some of them will be currently online that you could take at home, and then a couple you can take in the center. I believe the current number is 4 total, 2 at home and 2 in the center that you can take. But again, keep checking the website because it has changed based on the pandemic and what's going on with the pandemic. So what score should you be aiming for? That's obviously a huge question that people have. The score that you need is dependent on your profile. And by profile, that's going to be your background, citizenship, ethnicity, gender. It'll also be, what have you studied in the past and how comfortable will the committee be with your quantitative skills? And so all of that will weigh into what your particular score should be. But if there's a general answer, the answer is that you're aiming for 150 to 152. And you want your quant to be 10 or higher because quant is normally what the school is most concerned about. Will you be able to do the quantitative work in the program? And so in general, that is the score to aim for. Again, people with certain profiles can be below the 150, and people with certain profiles might need to be a little bit on the higher end, more closer to 155. So, you can always reach out to someone to try to get their feedback about giving your candidacy what do you need for a score. For Wharton does tend to be the pickiest of all the schools about the executive assessment score because they have a very quantitative, very rigorous program, and they want to make sure that anyone who enters the program is going to be able to thrive and succeed in the program. So they're typically looking for somewhat higher. A safer score for most candidates will be around 154 to 155. And then for the most competitive profiles, which will tend to be Indian foreign national men, sometimes East Asian men, foreign nationals also fall in that category. 157 or higher is a much safer score for a school like Wharton, and the quant you would want at least at 14. So again, get a strong sense of what you should be aiming for, and then as you practice, you will know whether or not you're close to that target. Okay, so the next thing to think about is engaging with the school. So assuming that you do have some time, if you have a 2-month period, you should have time. If you're about 3 weeks out, you may be able to do less of this, but in the ideal world, you will want to engage with the school, meaning attend information sessions, attend webinars. It's fine if those are online during the pandemic. You want to reach out to current students and to alumni members just to discuss their experiences, what they thought of the school. And in general, the point is to demonstrate interest in the program beyond just reading the website. It just shows that you're serious about the school, you're engaged with the school, you're excited about being part of the program. Essays. Now, this is one of the most important parts of the application. And so just remember that it's your marketing package, essentially. It's your marketing package, your opportunity to showcase your skills, the quality of your work experience, what you have to offer to the school. And so you should be looking at the content as you're responding to the essay prompts strategically, to know that those are the elements that you're trying to address, showcasing your skills, showcasing what you have to give to the school, your achievements, and so forth. And so when you're looking at the prompts, make sure to brainstorm really well about what will be a great response. And then spend a lot of time composing and revising your essays to make sure they're outstanding. For the EMBA, you also want to make sure that if you see what I call a weeder question, that you're going to really think through, well, what is the right content to use for that essay? And by weeder, I mean it's one that is clearly aimed at understanding what the quality of your work experience is, how much leadership skills and leadership experience do you have. And so a question like, tell me about a time you promoted inclusion in the workplace is one of those. Someone who is higher up in the organization and has actually, created, launched, driven initiatives is going to be very well placed in that. And then someone who has never even been on a committee and maybe hasn't really done anything even as a team leader to promote inclusion will not be well positioned to respond to that. And so for the person who doesn't have as much leadership, you need to really think through what can you present to be competitive against someone who might be higher up and driving initiatives. And so those particular questions do require more thought about what is the right strategic response. So put some good time into your essays and make sure that those are composed well and compelling. Recommendations do weigh as heavily as the essays, and so you want to make sure that the recommendations you get are outstanding. Really give great detail about all of your skills, your achievements, your potential for the future. Think about who the best writers are for you. In general, you want someone who's superior to you and knows your work very well, so they can give lots of stories and give examples of your great skills. Um, and then you in particular should get an understanding of what does a strong letter of recommendation look like. You should be gaining an understanding of what sort of topics are high impact that will distinguish you from the competition in admissions. And you would want to make sure that your writers are focusing in on those higher impact topics. So, help your writers understand what a great recommendation is, and then make sure that you're um, getting those written by people who are going to provide glowing letters of recommendation that present you as a very accomplished business person and leader, and someone with a great deal of future potential. The application form, some people will forget that this takes a lot of time, and so make sure not to overlook that fact. Some of these forms are very detailed, others are more biographical. They're just asking for information about your where you grew up, where you went to school. It's more just data. So just get logged in early to sort of look and see what is the application form asking for. And if it is extensive, you obviously need to start working on that earlier. But some of the things that you tend to see in the more detailed ones is they're going to be asking you very specific questions about your job responsibilities. And so you're going to have to answer those in particular for that school. They might ask for details about your workplace and academic honors. They may limit what you can say, and therefore you have to think about what are the best ones to include on the form. And there may also be mini essays. And so some people don't recognize that there might actually be pockets of more essays on the form, about 200 words here, 300 words there. And so be aware of that, because those are pretty much essays just like the broader essays that you might see on the website. And those should be written well and written strategically with, admission, trying to gain admission in mind. Interviews. In most cases, the schools will call you for interview if they've read the application and feel that you're a promising candidate. One of the exceptions is Wharton, where they want you to interview before the deadline in most cases. And so just know that for the interview, it's very important. They they want to get a sense of who you are. Are you consistent with the application that they're reading? They want to get a sense of what you might be like in the classroom. Will you be a good contributor? And so prepare well for that interview. Just know that it's the only formal interview you will have in the admissions process. You want to make sure that before you go through that interview, you have your positioning down, which means you know what to say in terms of what your goals are, short term and long term, what you bring to the school, why you'll be a great pick. Um, Identify frequently asked questions for the school that you're going to interview with, and then rehearse well before the interview. So, I would say take a week or two to, decide what you might say to some of those frequently asked questions, practice it, rehearse it so that it's going to be quite fluid during the interview process. And so schools are different. So that is one reason you want to get familiar with what type of interview it is. MIT, for instance, is known for behavioral questions. Those tend to be harder to respond to, especially if a candidate is younger in their tenure of work, because they're going to be asking you things like how you responded in a certain situation. And so someone who has 30 years of experience will have a lot of different examples to pull from, and someone who is younger with a shorter tenure of work experience will have a harder time coming up with some of the examples. And so if you know you're going to go through a behavioral interview, you should prepare very well for that. And it's quite possible to do that. And then other schools, it's much more relaxed. It's just a conversation. So just, understand, try to find out what is the interview like for the school that you're going to apply to, and then prepare appropriately. So that's just the overview, hopefully something to guide you as you're thinking about trying to apply in a short period of time to one of these top programs. If you need some assistance, feel free to reach out to us. If you would like us to give you a free profile evaluation, also feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you understand how competitive you are, and give you advice about where to apply. So right now, I'm going to see if there are any sort of questions to respond to. There's only a couple I might answer right now. But some people do ask, how does this change if you are dealing with a much shorter time frame of like maybe 3 weeks instead of 2 months? And one of the things I would say is most important if it's a much shorter time frame is get your recommendations mobilized soon, because they need time to write the recommendations. One important thing to mention, though, is that sometimes the schools will be open to you bringing in some of the materials after the deadline. And so, for instance, they will want your essays in and the application in, but sometimes they will allow you to turn in the executive assessment a couple weeks later. They might also let you put in the recommendations a couple weeks after the deadline. So if you find that you are starting very late, revise your resume, reach out to the school, and then ask them for permission to maybe turn in the recommendations or the executive assessment after the deadline. Again, in many cases, they will allow you to do that. And then that means that you just have to focus in the short term on getting outstanding essays and the application form and the resume all together submitted, and then take it from there. All right. Well, listen, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about the process. I know that some of you will be, just taking your holiday, and after the Christmas period, you might be looking up and thinking, okay, let's get started. So hopefully you'll find this webinar and it'll motivate you to get things in order, and also reassure you that it's quite possible to get everything prepared and submitted in a relatively short amount of time. So thank you for joining us today. It's been a wonderful pleasure as always, and take care. Happy holidays.